suppose one is that people tend to feel that filing for bankruptcy is some sort of immoral act. It's a moral failing that you've incurred this debt and you have an obligation to pay it, and you're not paying it because you're going into bankruptcy, and therefore there's something wrong with you as a moral being. My own feeling is that's nonsense. Obviously, as a bankruptcy attorney, I think bankruptcy is a good thing. Not in every case, but generally speaking, it is a good thing. And for someone that takes the position that it's immoral, well, one source of morality that people turn to is the Bible. And it turns out that in the law of Moses, in the Old Testament, in the 5th book called Deuteronomy, in the 15th chapter, bankruptcy is mandated every 7 years for the entire nation of Israel. All debts had to be wiped out every 7 years, just like clockwork. So if your morality is based on some sort of biblical theme, well, it sure seems like God says it's okay. In fact, it's required. Now, in the ideal world, you would say you'd pay all your debts, but in the ideal world, there wouldn't be such thing as debt. So the fact that there exists debt in the first place means we're in a somewhat less than ideal world. And that less than ideal world has all sorts of things that come up. Life is messy. It's not some nice, clean sitcom where you can just go down the script and you know what's going to happen. Sometimes the economy takes a turn for the worse. Sometimes your business fails not because you did something wrong, but because maybe your supply chain fell apart or the pandemic breaks out. And so the fact that you go into bankruptcy is not necessarily an indication of anything other than you've had a reversal of fortune and you can no longer pay these debts. Or if you can pay the debts, you're going to need a lot of time to do it. And that's why we have chapters 11 and 13, 11 primarily for businesses and individuals that can't qualify for 7 or 13, and 13, which is sort of 11 light. So I think that's probably the biggest stigma. The misconception that most people have is that the person who files for bankruptcy just goes and runs up a huge amount of debt and shortly thereafter files for bankruptcy. Ha ha, I've really screwed my creditors. Well, while that may happen on occasion, I can say that with my clients, having spent plenty of time with them, I don't see that happening. Most of them are really crestfallen having to go through a bankruptcy. They tell me, this isn't something I wanted to do, but I'm stuck. I have to do it. I have too much debt. I got in over my head. And so this idea that the profligate is going to be the main filer for bankruptcy, I think is a misconception. Again, I don't dispute that there are cases where this comes up, but I do dispute that this is the norm. It is unusual, at least in my experience and in the experience of my various colleagues here in the Central District of California. So I think bankruptcy generally is not a place for the immoral or for the profligate. Also, I think it's good for the country, generally speaking. Now, that may seem counterintuitive. You might think, well, what? We're just supposed to all file for bankruptcy and this is a good thing? Well, we don't all have to file for bankruptcy. And although in ancient Israel, bankruptcy was mandated for the entire nation, just like clockwork every 7 years, we don't all have to. But suppose you start a business and it's the first time you've started a business and you're going to succeed, right? Well, it turns out most businesses fail within a year or two of inception. What happens then? Well, if that person who started the business can't apply bankruptcy to whatever debts were incurred, that person is never, ever going to try to start another business. And other people will see, oh, this guy tried to start a business and now he's on the ash heap of history. Next thing you know, nobody's going to be starting businesses and you have a dead economy and a dead society. And we do have some of those on the planet, most notably places like North Korea. And so in order to encourage people to take risks, it's good to have that safety valve, that idea that if it doesn't work out, well, you can restart. And so you start that second business. The first business didn't work out, but you may have learned a lot of stuff that can be very useful in avoiding problems when you start that second business. And our history is replete with people who failed on a first venture, but later on succeeded. I think Milton Hershey is a great example of somebody whose initial business ventures failed. But once he got going with chocolate, he became a very successful entrepreneur, and so successful that now there's a town in Pennsylvania called Hershey. So is bankruptcy the ideal? Of course not. But it is a good thing, and it is not necessarily the last refuge of scoundrels. It is a place for people to regroup and get started again. And I might add, a lot of bankruptcies that are filed are not filed under Chapter 7, where debts are just wiped out. They're filed under Chapter 11 or Chapter 13. And those two chapters involve debt repayment plans where the creditors do get paid. Now, they don't necessarily always get paid in full, but I've had Chapter 11s where the creditors do get paid in full. And so in those cases, the creditors just have a little time to wait in order to get paid, but they do get paid. So long-winded answer, but the gist of it is, I think there are misconceptions, there are stigmas, and they're unwarranted.